I didn't want to talk about this, but I've gotten so many questions about it. I figured it's just easier to make a video on it than to do a bunch of Twitter replies. By the way, follow me on Twitter. I don't like talking about this stuff because it's just so dumb inherently, and I don't see what the point of the conversation is to begin with. Basically, what we're talking about is there was an article that was posted by a journalist, quote unquote, over at PC Gamer, where he said that he completed Sekiro Shadows Die Twice, the latest game from Software, using cheats, and he was not ashamed of this at all. And it started this whole debate on cheat codes in games and assistance in difficult games, and then also easy modes, and then somehow it morphed into a debate over accessibility for disabled gamers. It turned into something way beyond what it started as, and so we're gonna cover it all, and I'm just gonna throw my thoughts out there, and then I want to hear your thoughts down below. Maybe we can find some common ground, or at least figure out what the hell is going on. Now, before we jump into it, I think it's important that we clarify a couple of key things, because a lot of the people that sort of jump-started this whole debate are people with a lot of Twitter followers, but aren't really heavy into gaming. They just saw this article trending, and they decided to jump in and talk about how terrible and stupid the whole debate was, which is partially true, but I think it's important to understand what we're referring to before we start criticizing it. When this guy over at PC Gamer says that he used cheats, quote unquote, to finish Sekiro Shadows Die Twice, I think a lot of people thought that he was using cheat codes, or he was using some mechanism within the game in order to make the game easier so that he could complete it. Usually that's what people think of when they think of cheats in a game. They don't think of going in and altering the game's code in order to have an easier time completing it. They think of something like The Sims, which Jana Sexy Bad Choices Hall, as you see in this tweet here, kind of implied, where Sims is using cheat codes that are built specifically for it so that you can have an easier time playing the game. And I would say that this is still in the spirit of the game, because after all, the developers created those cheats. It's not like you're going into the game's code, you know, finding the currency stat in the game code and then changing that to an infinite number so that you have all the money that you could possibly use. You can still effectively do that through the mechanics the developers put in there, but they're two different things. One's sort of in the spirit of the game because the developer created it, and the other is just cheating. What this guy over at PC Gamer was doing is he downloaded a mod which goes into the game's files and specifically alters the memory within your computer while the game is being processed to slow it down artificially. So if you're playing the game in real time on PC, you can be getting a steady 60 frames. What he's doing is he's going in, changing the internal game clock so that it renders at half speed, for instance. So you can still have high frame rates, but the speed is just cut in half. So the character's animations when he swings is way slower. And theoretically with this, you can slow it all the way down. So it's a frame a second. Are you doing it 1/60th the speed that you would have been doing it otherwise, which makes it very, very easy to take on some of these larger bosses. And what he starts the article describing is that he wanted to use these cheats in order to learn the attack patterns, because he wanted to take it slow, study them, and then he was going to defeat the boss at regular speed. But then he went back and decided, you know what, screw it, I'm just going to beat him with the cheats all the way on because I don't really feel bad about it, and I just want to get this done with. I don't have the time to learn all these attack patterns and do it the quote-unquote right way, so I'm going to do it through this cheating mod, or this modification to the way that the game operates. And I think this is where the first sort of distinction comes in this debate, because I think at this point, this juncture is where most people who are on opposing sides start to argue at each other, misinterpreting and misunderstanding what the other one is saying. The conversation is not whether or not this guy has the right or should be able to alter the game and the way that it runs in order to have an easier time. Very, very, very few people are actually arguing that. And of course, I'm not going to argue that. You bought the game. It's a piece of technology. It's a chunk of software with a bunch of lines of code. You own it. If you want to go in there and start tweaking stuff, go for it. That's not the conversation. That's not the debate. The debate is whether or not this is in the spirit of the game, or whether or not this is a good thing to do, I guess, or whether or not this diminishes your status or your perceived expertise in the realm of video games, specifically when you work at a site like PC Gamer, where you are likely being judged, and your value in your position is directly tied to your knowledge, expertise, and integrity when it comes to playing video games and experiencing them and explaining them. And so when you admit to something like this, many people are not going to take you as seriously. And that's more where the conversation lies. And this is where my tweet came in, jumping into this fray. And as you can see right here, it's fairly straightforward. I don't care if you finish the game using cheats. Go for it. It's not a multiplayer game. You're not affecting anybody else. You're not hurting anybody else. If you want to do it, go for it. I don't care. You're just a little All jokes aside, what I mean is just that clearly the developers intended you to experience the game a certain way. And if you are a gaming journalist or critic or whatever the heck this guy claims to be, you should likely be playing the games the way that they were intended to be played. It's why when I'm playing a game for a critique, for instance, I'm not going to use speedrunning strats on my first run through, because I don't think that that's necessarily in the spirit of the way that the game was designed for first-time players. Yeah, technically you can clip through walls and you can do things like that to make the game easier and faster, which for me, developing and making these massive videos faster is often better, but it's not in the spirit of what the developer wanted. So I'm not going to go through with speedrunning strats because it's not in the spirit of the game as it's designed for the broad public, in which case I don't see how this could be defended if he's playing the game for review or for some sort of professional capacity. However, if it is just for personal reasons, again, no issue, do whatever. Just don't expect people to respect you in the same way that they will if you say, yeah, I played through Sekiro all the way through and I had no problem with it. But once again, the conversation didn't end there, because it never ends there. And it started to morph into a broader discussion about easy modes for gamers who have difficulty with difficult games, and how it's unfair that there are games that are very, very difficult, because not all players are good at video games or good at these types of video games, are able to get precise timings down. And so it's unfair, or it's unjust for developers to do that and to only have one difficulty level in their game. They should be adding easy modes. And this kind of climaxed in an article written over on Forbes by their gaming and technology, whoever this is. And he implied that it is disrespectful to gamers not to have an easy mode, saying that From Software is being disrespectful to gamers by not having an easy mode. Now, there are kind of two approaches that you can take towards discussions like these, and both are frankly bad if you are talking about a pragmatic and effective approach in having a dialogue, because either way you're going to upset somebody. On the one hand, you can say that developers aren't developing easy modes for games like these because it doesn't fulfill their creative vision, and so they're going to just keep it the way it is, and they're not going to quote-unquote compromise on their vision, because clearly Sekiro Shadows Die Twice is designed for that just slog. It's designed for the suffering and the frustration. That's what these games are about, is learning through that suffering. It's a weird thing that gamers like, or at least some gamers like, but nonetheless it is a core part of what these games are. Where this approach starts to get a little dicey or just frustrating is when game developers, writers, journalists, all of these people in a self-righteous, virtue signaling sort of way come out and say, well, helping people who need easier options or more accessibility options is never compromising my vision, because my vision is all inclusive. And so if your vision isn't, you're a bigot, or you are not helping the gamers that help put you where you are, blah, 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 bullcrap. And tied to this approach is the second one, which is the fact that developers often, if they're spending all of their time crafting the experience for this sort of delicate but precisely tuned and balanced gameplay, that you end up with something like Sekiro or Bloodborne, Dark Souls, Celeste, whatever it may be, to go back through and make an easy mode and make sure that it's balanced and do all of that. There's costs involved with that. And frankly, the number of people that are going to buy the game because there's an easy mode, but we're not going to buy the game anyways, is very, very small. So it just doesn't make a lot of business sense to put all the time in there. If you say that, then you're a greedy capitalist scumbag and you're a bad person. Root. Like it's stupid tribalism. There's no way that you can have an honest discussion with it. It's Twitter personified. But I want to make sure to give everybody a fair shot here. For instance, the tweet I showed from Corey Barlog, he went on to explain a little clearer what he meant by this. And this is where I think a lot of the waters are becoming muddied, because a lot of us, I think, agree on this topic. We're just not defining our terms clearly, such as with this, he says accessibility features do not equal easy mode. Challenge, even extreme challenge, can coexist with options to allow gamers different from you to play the same game with the same level of challenge. And I agree with him, but once again, you have to understand exactly what he's referring to. Is he talking about a game like Sekiro, saying that you should have an easy mode so that people who maybe, for instance, genetically or just biologically are incapable of sending the signal from their brain to their pointer finger to hit the parry block button to play the game properly, quote unquote, or get to those final levels playing the game the way that it's designed to be played. Maybe if somebody's like that, then to have an easy mode or an option to have a different controller that accommodates for that, that would be a good thing. I think all of us would support that. Xbox with their Super Bowl ads on accessibility, all of those things are fantastic, and I support them wholeheartedly. But what I think a lot of us are referring to when we say that you shouldn't compromise on your vision, quote unquote, for the sake of accessibility, it depends on what we mean by accessible. Are we saying it needs to be easier so that people who are lazy or don't have the time can go and experience the same game as the people doing it on the difficult level? Or are we talking about people who have disabilities or who have difficulties for reasons completely beyond their control? We want to make sure they can experience the same things as other players who have more time or more abilities, whatever it may be. And I think all of us support all of those options. If there's a will and way, if there's a way that we can make these games as accessible as possible, I would think everybody would support it. But this is where my business background comes into play, because once again, we don't live in an ideal world and we never will. So it's very easy to say, well, yes, I would love my game to be perfectly accessible to everybody. Corey Barlog, developer and game director behind the newest God of War, he took a lot of steps to try to make sure that game was accessible, different difficulty options, and I believe they even added in a color blind mode recently. All of that stuff is fantastic, and I fully support it. But there's always going to be players who can't play the game in the same way. Okay, you made it more accessible for people who are colorblind or have difficulty playing more difficult games, maybe because they're younger, maybe because they're older, maybe because their vision is bad, or whatever it may be. That's great. But there's always going to be one more group that is disenfranchised or can't play the game the same way. What about people who have really bad eyesight and can't experience the game the same way? What about a blind player who can't access it the same way? What about a player who was born without fingers and can't use a controller in the same way that you would be required to in order to play these games at a faster paced level? So you're always going to leave somebody behind. It's not to say that we shouldn't try to bring as many people along with us, but it's just to say we need to maintain a reasonable expectation of what's doable and possible here, and we shouldn't demonize each other for pointing out those differences. But if we flip it and we look at the hardcore quote-unquote stance in this argument, which tends to be personified by the people who say it is what it is, the game is what it is, you're playing it, you either can do it or you can't, and not all games are meant for all people, which I agree with on the outset. Like, yes, Sekiro, there are some people that just are never going to play it. My girlfriend is never going to finish Sekiro or any of the From Software games. They're just not designed for her. She doesn't find them interesting. She doesn't find them engaging enough to put in the time to learn the boss patterns and do all of that, play it the quote-unquote right way. So it's just not interesting for her in the same way that it is for other gamers. And that's okay. We don't all have to like the same things. But once again, in an ideal world, it would be great if there were more options to make sure that people who have difficult times playing those games could experience the same thing. It's all a matter of compromising the vision, whether or not that's something that's actually being done. Corey Barlog's point is that you can have an easier version of the game that doesn't compromise on the vision, quote unquote, because what's very difficult for me might be super extra difficult for you. And so if we can tailor the experience so that it's just difficult for you like it's difficult for me, based on where we started off, theoretically, that would make sure that everybody's experiencing the game in the same way, which I think is what a lot of these developers are saying when they're equating their stance to the most moral position, saying that they're not compromising on their vision when they make accessibility options. And so all of this, again, it's just a complicated discussion with a lot of terms being thrown back and forth, and I don't think anybody's taken the time to actually understand what the other side is thinking or saying before they formulate an opinion and develop a perspective on it. And to go all the way back, this is my point with, I don't know where these conversations go or what the point of them really is, because we end up right where we started, except we're all a little bit more upset and a little grumpier. Because on the one hand, yes, I fully support accessibility options. I want as many accessibility options as possible for gamers. Colorblind options, options for people with difficulty of hearing, such as subtitles and sizing and scaling of subtitles, things like that are fantastic. Other options, such as improvements for difficulty, as long as they aren't developed in a way that compromises the overall structure and design philosophy of the game, those are all fantastic. But again, we don't live in an ideal world. And so you're not always going to get all of the things that you want. You might eventually, after the game releases, you might get some updates and things like that. But at the same time, I think it's important to respect everybody's artistic visions when they create these games. If Hidetaka Miyazaki is looking at Sekiro and he says, you know what, I don't think we need an easy mode. I think an easy mode is completely antithetical to what this game is designed to be. So we're not going to do it. I respect that. I don't think he's being anti people with disabilities, whatever that term would be. There's got to be a term for it. Disability phobic, I guess. He's not being anti-disabilities. He's not being a bigot. He's not being a bad person. He's just making his decision based off of his vision of what he wants the game to be. And it's also a pragmatic decision based on the business circumstance around the studio that's developing that game or would be in charge of developing that more accessible mode. Ideally, everybody would have options like this. It's not an ideal world, though, and we need to stop demonizing each other for disagreeing on something when everybody has reasonable explanations for why they're doing what they're doing. If a game is difficult and they choose not to make it easier so that people who have trouble with difficult games can get into it, they're not bad people for making that decision, just like you're not all of a sudden way more virtuous than everybody else because you put in subtitle options and things in your game. I'll applaud you, I'll support you in that decision, but you're not the virtuous holy man versus the sinful beggar down here. We're just gamers, we're people, we're trying to make products that everybody enjoys, and when it's a free market, the games that support the most players will tend to do better than the games that don't, and they'll naturally progress up towards that ideal form because gamers want to support that in general. I think we all agree on this. Again, I think we just are talking past each other most of the time. I don't know. Let me know your thoughts down below. Again, like I said, these videos, we just end up ranting and talking and saying the same things over and over again. But hopefully some of this made sense and sparked a thought in you that I can read and perhaps evolve my position. And maybe something I said can evolve your position. I don't know. I guess we'll find out in the comment section below. Thank you for watching, honestly and truly. I really do appreciate it, everybody. Make sure to check out the newest video on Sekiro. I love you all. Follow me on Twitter, Instagram. Check out my Patreon. Exclusive access to videos. Cool stuff. I'm bad at outros. Bye.